they are, how to add them, how to subtract them, mixed numbers, improper fractions, or fractions that are equal to or greater to than 1. So in this video, you're going to see a whole bunch of that. So first, you have to understand what fractions are. Fractions are parts of a whole. Most of them are usually smaller than a whole. You'll see it represented just like this. And there's multiple parts. You have the numerator, which is the top part. This tells you how many parts you actually have. And then you have your bottom part, which is the denominator. This number tells you how many parts of a whole there are. So to make a whole, we need 3 parts. We only have 1/3. You can represent it by looking like this. You have 3 equal parts, and we have yellow is what we have. That's our 1 out of the 3, our 1/3. So simplifying and finding equivalent. Simplifying fractions are ways to get fractions to its simplest form. This usually means you're taking a fraction and making it smaller. You mostly will always divide to do this. Equivalent fractions are fractions that are equal to it, but in a different form. So let's take a look at 2/8. If I want to simplify this, I'm going to need to find a common number, and I'm going to divide by it. So just like when we do common multiples for Arduino, or when we did common multiples in our beginning chapters, we know that 2 and 8 have a common number, and that number is 2. They're both even. So I could take 2/8 and divide it by 2. So I could take 2, divide it by 2, and I get 1, and I could get 8 and divide it by 2 and get 4. So the simplified version of 2/8 is 1/4. This is also an equivalent fraction. It's just shown differently. Now, you could see number lines too, and figuring out number lines could be tricky, especially when we need to look at what we're working with. So just looking here, we know that we're working with a number line that has to be smaller than 1 since we have a whole number 1. And to find it, we count the spaces in between. So you have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. So that means they divided this number line into 10 equal parts. It should be equal, but Mr. V's lines are not so equal because, well, it's a lot harder to do this on a computer than it is to do it on a whiteboard. But realistically, this should be 10 equal parts. That means our denominator is going to be out of 10. So we can start with our first one, which is 1/10. And our first one starts on the first line because if it was going to be here, well, 1/10 is not equal to 0. 0/10 is equal to 0. 1/10 is a little bit bigger than 0. So you can go and slowly fill in each spot till you have 10/10. 10/10 is equal to 1. You have 10 out of the 10. So adding and subtracting fractions. Let's go over adding. When adding fractions, you must first see if your denominators are the same. Then you need to find a common denominator. Then you can multiply to then work with numbers. So let's look at 1/4 and 3/8. Just looking at 1/4 and 3/8, we could see that 4 and 8 are different denominators. That means we can't add them yet. So we're going to have to try and change something. So I'm going to take my 2 denominators, my bottom numbers, and say, okay, what numbers do they have in common? And I like to sometimes write out my multiples. It makes it a little bit easier for me to see. But if you're not sure, that's perfectly fine. So you can sit here and look and go, okay, 4. Well, it's 4 times 1, 4 times 2, right? 8 times 1. So we know that we could take 4, multiply it by 2 to get 8. So to do that, whatever you do to the bottom, you do to the top. So you do 4 times 2, that gets you 8. You do 1 times 2, that gets you 2. Now you can add them because both your denominators are the same. When adding fractions, we only add the top numbers. You never add the bottom. You only add the top. That's going to get us a fraction of 5/8. Again, the biggest thing you need to always look for is to see if your bottom numbers are the same. If your bottom numbers aren't the same, then you need to find a common denominator or a multiple that works for both numbers. And when we subtract fractions, all the rules are pretty much the same. We're going to take the same one. You find your common. You once again multiply to get a common denominator. And then you just subtract the top numbers to get 1/8. This may seem a little tricky, and we're going to be working on it a lot more within the next several weeks. But I don't want you to get super confused on this yet. One last thing that I want to go over is mixed numbers and improper fractions. Mixed numbers are numbers that show the whole number and the fraction. So for example, this is 3 and 8/10. That means I have 3 wholes and 8/10. Now, I can always simplify this, but the most important thing is this mixed number 3 wholes here. This 3 wholes is still out of 10. Okay? So if I were to simplify this, as we've gone over our simplification rules, I only simplify the fraction. I keep the whole number, and I only simplify the fraction. And we're going to go over this a little bit more throughout the next couple days. But I also want you to see what an improper fraction, or fractions that are equal to greater than 1. These fractions look like this. They have a bigger numerator than the denominator. So 9/6. That means that there's a whole number here, and there's going to be something left over. And you can convert this improper fraction, or a fraction that's equal to or greater than 1, into a mixed number like this. That's going to be it for right now. There'll be another video in the next couple weeks to help you kind of put it all together and use it in different ways. If this video helped you, awesome. If you're still a little confused by it, it's perfectly fine. You can look up, go back and redo this video, or if you want to look up some other ways, or even practice on iExcel, I think it would help everyone.